Good to go? Okay, so it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having us. So I'm here to tell you more about the progress we've had at Brave in the last several months. And well, we've been really busy. So we now have close to 100 people, 90-something employees. We are shipping on 4 platforms, Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android. And that alone can keep you busy, you know, blockchain aside as well. So interesting things have been happening. We have a few exciting updates coming down the pipe in the next couple of months as well related to Brave ads. I'll mention some of that also. But I'm here to give you a little bit of perspective over what we've accomplished over the last, I don't know, half a year to maybe 12 months or so. So in many ways, we are a bit of an outlier here as well, because if you sort of look at the code base, well, I mean, Brave is a sort of a traditional product, right? It's a user-facing product. It's in the category, in the same category as other web browsers like Firefox and Chrome and Edge. So in many ways, we are sort of there, and from the standpoint of most kind of non-crypto users, this is our competition. And the other thing to point out is that, well, the crypto versus non-crypto breakdown within Brave is fairly different as well. So crypto is a small portion of what happens within the browser. Of course, it's there as well. We have a token for BAT, for the basic attention token. I'm sorry, we have a wallet for the basic attention token in the browser. But ultimately, a lot of development that we do has to do with making the end product appealing and useful to users, whether they want to use the wallet or not. And this is a lot of kind of our focus, and that determines our mindset as well. So, but to just give you, again, more perspective, if you're curious about the progress of Brave, the project, and the browser, as well as what's been happening with the basic attention token, a year after the crowd sale, after the ICO, we put together this timeline. So you can go to this website and check it out. And basically, this is how it starts. Back in 2017, we raised a fair bit of money in a brief period of time. And that was the genesis of a lot of what happened after that. And so just to give you more background on what this is about, if you haven't seen this before, so basic attention token, this is what I call the Bermuda Triangle of advertising. So you have users, you have publishers, and you have advertisers, all around the same sort of triangle. And the goal here is to bring some of these principles of transparency, decentralization, efficiency, preventing fraud, and so on and so forth. And I'll highlight some of these things as we go through this. But there is a real focus here on like real-world deliverables as well. So if you go and look at the Brave blog, you'll see some of the things that I'm highlighting here on this slide. And a lot of this is going to be things like partnerships with other companies or bodies. Some of them are in the advertising space, as well as kind of other themes, other areas as well. Some of these are technical deliverables. I don't know, we're improving the quality of blocking, or quite recently we had a blog post on the power savings, battery savings in Brave, which tend to be quite significant, on the order of 30, sometimes 50%, depending, of course, on the website and the workload. And we tend to basically be very public about it, and our goal is to be sort of regular with these updates as well. So in a given week, you might see 2 or 3 of these news items coming out on the blog also. And so some of these other things would be, you know, partnerships like this thing with Coinbase Earn, and so on and so forth. So we've been making progress on both the technical front as well as the business front. And there is quite a lot more. So if you're interested in finding out more about the project, go and check it out. You'll find things depending, you know, almost independently of your point of view. There are things here that will appeal to privacy advocates, as well as people who are kind of heavily into crypto, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to talk about several things. I'll tell you a little bit about the browser and the sort of genesis of that and why we wanted to do a different browser and some of the problems we're trying to solve on the web today. I'll tell you a little bit about the token and I'll give you some of the, I don't know, a preview of coming attractions, that sort of thing. So our end goal here is to improve the interaction between the end user and the web. And the web is changing and people are sometimes a little bit slow to realize that. And so I'll highlight some of the problems that we are trying to solve here. So we want to improve the privacy stance. We want to improve the privacy of the end user and we want the browser to help with that. We want to reform the way that digital advertising is done online. There are lots of problems that have to do with ad fraud, with having a lot of middlemen in the ecosystem, creating a lot of sort of obscurity, leading to a lot of the fraud that I mentioned, but also extracting a lot of the value that doesn't reach, for example, the publishers. And we also want to compensate users, and we want to compensate users for their attention specifically, and we do so with the help of the token we have, basic attention token. But just to kind of, sorry about that. What is going on here? Okay. Okay, so just to be on the same page here, so let me just kind of formulate some of the basic problems we're trying to address here. So the web as it is today is written with all sorts of privacy violating technology. So this is sometimes called EdTech and has to do with tracking the end user. So if you go to a page like this, so this is The Economist, the popular news magazine, and use an extension of some kind to tell you what's going on behind the scenes, you might be surprised to find out that there are dozens upon dozens of advertisers and trackers that are operating behind the scene that have nothing to do with the site itself, have nothing to do with the contents of the site, and these are the kind of entities you never invited to participate in your interactions between you and the first-party site that you are going to. So these are third parties that are really quite dominant on the web as of today. Things are getting somewhat more cleaner in Europe at least since GDPR took hold, but certainly in the US and other parts of the world, things are probably just as messy as they were a year ago. And users are paying quite a high price for this. So some of the estimates show that a typical website might be slower by, I don't know, as many as 5 seconds. There are tons of these trackers. So there are some of the websites like TMZ, for example, where the number of trackers present on the website is over 100, for instance. This can be quite expensive if you're paying for your network capacity, if you don't have an unlimited plan, or if you're traveling and roaming. And this is one of the main vectors for ransomware and malware, according to some of the reports, at least for 2017. And so this is a reflection of the end user response. So in the past 10 years, we've seen a drastic increase in the number or percentage of people using ad blockers. So let's do a show of hands. How many of you have used some sort of an ad blocker? Pretty much all of you, like a couple of hands then go up. But of course you're a technical audience, so this is not quite representative, but this picture alone shows you that this has been an ongoing trend for the past decade, and this is true of both desktop browsers and of course mobile browsers as well. So in many ways at Brave, we're just responding to that trend, giving users what they want to get in the first place, and as a result of this, Brave is also faster for regular browsing than most other browsers by as much as 30 to 40%. That's quite significant. So here's another problem that's a reflection of the changing landscape out there on the web, which is these days you must have seen something like this, right? So paywalls were not nearly as common about 5, 6 years ago, but now they seem to be everywhere. So at least for me, just about any high-quality news site I want to read has some sort of a paywall. Sometimes it's going to be a soft paywall, so they let you use 5 articles, read 5 articles first, and then after that they'll ask you, sometimes they have a limit, within a month you can only read 10, but ultimately the web is no longer free, and that's kind of a problem. kind of a problem because, well, I mean, ultimately, we're not really successfully creating an alternative monetization, content monetization ecosystem, because the number of people who actually have subscriptions to sites like this is really quite small. I mean, we can do another show of hands. Like, how many of you subscribe to more than 5 sites or paywall sites like this? More than 5? Nobody. 5 and more, please. You, sir. Okay. Okay. 3 and more. 3 and more. 1 and more. Okay. So for most people, it's like 1 and 2. So I'm not, okay, so I should talk to you offline because I'm curious what they are as well. But like most people cannot just like, you know, manage that many subscriptions. Even if they can afford it financially, they cannot keep track of the passwords and things like that. So that's kind of a problem in reflection of the fact that the equation on the web is changing. Also, the other thing to point out is that for advertisers, the current landscape is no longer working. If you look at click-through rates, and this is what is being shown over here on the right, they're abysmally low, and they're getting lower seemingly every passing month for most advertisers. So they're small fractions of a single percentage point. Now, the situation is quite a bit better if you look at the walled gardens such as Facebook and Twitter and a few others, which is, of course, why these companies are making money, and this determines their valuations and things of that sort. So there are ways to do things differently, just you know, the way that's based on third-party tracking, which has been the model on the web for the past, I don't know, 15 years or so, is really not working out anymore. So there was a graph, there was a chart that came out like last week, I think, from The Economist, where they show the progression of their advertising revenue versus subscription revenue. And lo and behold, the advertising revenue over the past 2 or 3 years has dropped significantly, whereas their subscription revenue actually has remained steady or has gone up a little bit as well. So the way that advertising sort of has been done is no longer working out for most participants. And so this justifies our introduction of the basic attention token and what we're trying to do in the browser in terms of creating a better experience for the end user. And this applies no matter, I mean, it doesn't really matter whether the user wants to use a BAT wallet within the browser, whether they want to engage with crypto, whether they want to use Brave delivered ads. They still get a better experience, which comes from the fact that the browser is faster, more nimble, more responsive, consumes less memory, consumes less power. If you're interested in those kind of characteristics, I can tell you more about that offline as well. Yeah, and this is the kind of thing that we basically prevent. So on the left you have, what is it, teamz.com with tracking on, and then after Brave enabled with shields up, you basically have a much more reduced picture, which is shown over here on the right, and this is why some of these savings in terms of performance are there. So, right, so I talked about that. So, the goal is to create an ecosystem around BAT by creating a different way to deliver advertising. So we control how that's done. This is done independently and differently from the way it has been done for the past 15 years or so, using exchanges, using auctions, all of that ad tech machinery. This is done within the browser by creating client-side privacy-preserving models of users' interests that allow us to do precise, much more accurate matching on the client while not violating the privacy of the end user. There are tons of advantages to that, to, well, just about everybody involved, right? So essentially the user gets rewarded for this. If they choose to opt into the ad ecosystem, they're rewarded directly with BAT. Advertisers get better quality of matching and the reduced kind of ad fraud situation as well. And publishers also benefit from that, and because they can opt into this also and receive BAT. So I have some visualizations here, but frankly, if you're interested in what's going on, I think you're better off downloading the dev branch of the browser and playing with some of this stuff as well, just by yourself, because this is where some of the exciting things are happening. So we now have an initial version of Brave Ads that's now running in the dev version of the browser. So if you were to download that, you'll see that every once in a while, there'll be an ad that pops up. So typically you'd get maybe 3, sometimes 4 ads a day. The goal here is not to barrage you with these things, and they come up as an operating system notification. We're not replacing ads that were taken out of the page. They're not embedded in the page. They're just a separate thing altogether. And as time goes by, in the next several weeks, you'll see other things like confirmation that results in payments that go into your Brave wallet within the browser there as well. So let me skip that. And a little bit about the phases of the rollout, and this comes from the white paper. So the first phase is, so we're roughly at the end of the second phase over here. So this is, essentially this new advertising model that's delivered within the browser. And our hope is to have that in operation sometime mid-year. And of course, this involves, moving a lot of somewhat disconnected pieces here. So, so we have quite a lot of demand from advertisers, but of course they are, commercial entities, and they're fairly conservative as well. So when it comes to crypto, they're not nearly as excited about crypto as most of you, for example, right? So it takes a lot to, a lot of effort in many cases to work with them. And every time you cross the crypto to real world to fiat divide, there is some activation energy that needs to be mustered to work things out as well. So the last stage is integration with websites, and this is something that we'll probably do, well, I don't know, I don't have a fixed kind of timeline on that part for you, but for complex websites, we are hoping to support more interesting scenarios in terms of providing micropayments on sites themselves. So imagine a site, like a social networking site like Twitter, for example, where every time you like a post or you retweet somebody's post or something of that sort, there is a small micropayment that gets transmitted to the author of that. So that's a typical use case for the last stage. So in the browser, we have a system of anonymous contribution that's been around for a while, and every, I don't know, month or so, the UI changes slightly. So the UI today is slightly different from what I'm showing on the slides. But again, the easiest thing to, you can try this for yourself. You'll see what this looks like for you. Yeah, so there's a focus here on protecting the privacy of the end user. So we use this system called Anonymize for anonymous contributions. And here's a little bit more by way of details in terms of kind of how the distribution of funds happens. So in the case, there are essentially 2 ad models embedded into this. So in the case of the first model, the user gets 70% share of the revenue, really, which is quite significant, right? So instead of basically their time and attention being taken away from them, they're getting something from the system in return. And so, of course, the hope is that this by itself will be enough to grow the user base and to create enough users who are excited about using the platform, because they can turn around and use the BAT that they get out of this for something else as well. And when it comes to using this, well, the scenarios that we are working on are premium content, such as video consumption or access to sites that might use a paywall, right? So imagine a pay-as-you-go model where, suppose you, I don't know, you go to work in the morning, and then during the day you get, I don't know, 3 or 4 ads thrown at you, and you click on 2 of them because they appeal to you, and so you get, say, 4 BAT in your wallet at the end of the day, and then you go home and spend 3 of those 4 BAT on watching a movie through a video site of some kind. And that way you basically can play the crypto game, if you will, without having to, I don't know, go and figure out how to exchange, how to get Bitcoin in the first place, and then exchange Bitcoin for BAT, and dealing with all of those sort of details, which is probably fine for for the crowd sitting in this room, but for a regular lay person, this is quite a lot of trouble. So this is a way to create a pay-as-you-go model which basically does not depend on too many people figuring out how to enter the system. Essentially, it comes with batteries included, if you will. And this is about the second kind of the publisher ad deal. So the deal there is a little different. So in this case, if these are ads integrated with the publisher, then the publisher gets the lion's share of the revenue, but Brave and the user get something as well. And so, as I mentioned, you'll see various parts of the ad subsystem coming out in the next couple of months. I mean, we have something already operational in the browser as it ships today, at least in the desktop. But we've been trialing various things related to that since, what is it, mid-June or something like that, 2018, improving the quality of our machine learning models and so on and so forth. And that process continues. And will continue in the future as well. So if you're interested in some of the machine learning work we've been doing here, so I'm happy to talk to you offline. So there's a lot of interesting work happening in the space of privacy-preserving machine learning, and some of these things are practical enough to deploy as well. Not too many things, but a few things in fact are. So this is one of our major focus areas as well, but I'm happy to talk about that offline. Lots of possibilities. Let me kind of skip that. I don't think that's as important for this crowd. So here's something I wanted to highlight though, which is in terms of our growth, some of the key numbers are shown here. And actually some of these are lower bounds. I think by now some of these are higher as well. So as far as the number of monthly active users, we are at about 5.8 million, I believe. I don't think we're quite at 6 million. We're hoping to, well, we'll see what happens by the end of the year. We're hoping to experience quite a bit of growth because of the ad ecosystem being deployed. I think the breakdown is slightly different on mobile versus desktop. We are a little bit more balanced. For a while, we were really heavy on mobile, but not as much on the desktop. I think the situation will get rebalanced as we progress. Some numbers in terms of the BAT wallets. Here's something interesting. So the number of verified publishers. So publishers, that is to say websites, generally speaking, that have gone through this Brave verification process and have gone through a KYC process associated with that is something like 23,000. The number of YouTube channels that have gone through our verification process is something like 15,000. In addition to that, which is what I'm, I guess, not showing on this slide, there is also some number of Twitch channels, right? So Twitch is another popular sort of site for creators. Slightly different content, slightly different monetization model compared to YouTube, but this kind of highlights the need for different models for content monetization here as well. So what happens, of course, on YouTube is that in recent months and years, it's become quite a lot more difficult for YouTube channel creators and maintainers to earn money to keep themselves afloat, quite frankly, right? And so as a result, they're looking for other ways to earn, and this is why the model we're providing in Brave is quite appealing to many of these channel creators. So within, think about, what is it, I don't know, about 10 days or so after we announced support for YouTube channels and paying to YouTube channels within Brave, we had something like 10,000 of these people coming on board. So this is really quite significant and highlights all of these themes of demonetization around content creation that I've been sort of alluding to before. And of course, also there are traditional partnerships with sort of major media groups like the Dow Jones Media Group partnership and several others as well. So I wanted to leave you with this kind of, I don't know, maybe mixed message, especially for this kind of conference, which is building a product that combines crypto and a lot of traditional stuff, if you will, right? Being in a traditional product category, that's not always particularly easy. Specifically, right, I already alluded to some of the challenges that come up if you try to, cross the fiat to crypto divide, right? The issues, some of them are related to KYC, but some of them are related to sort of other factors, and there are some fairly significant problems that might come up there. But some perhaps more obvious challenges, of course, apply to us as well. So the transparent nature of most, of public blockchains doesn't really mesh particularly well with the data privacy stance that we take at Brave, right? So we wouldn't be able to take, say, transaction confirmations, even if we're able to afford them from the standpoint of fees and scalability, generally speaking, because it's so easy to de-anonymize users based on their behavior, we cannot really afford to put too much user-generated data on a blockchain. So that's kind of a problem. We need to figure out what to derive from that data that actually might be safe to put in a blockchain. Full decentralization from the get-go is hard, and so our approach there oftentimes is we start with a system that's working and then decentralize it over time, and I think this is actually not such a terrible thing, generally speaking. Working is better than, and getting real users and understanding what their problems are. I mean, there's a lot of merit there. This third problem here, I mean, people here I'm sure realize that, right? So getting a regular person, an average browser user, to understand the nuts and bolts of crypto, well, that's really pretty hard. And the question is, how do you design a product that hides a lot of that complexity and only exposes what is absolutely necessary and creates UI flows around that are accessible to end users? Well, that's definitely something you really need to do if you want your product to grow and have lots of, millions and millions of people using it. And yeah, so, I mean, integrating real-world business with the world of crypto is not such an easy thing, right? So we talk to publishers and we talk to advertisers, well, most of these are fairly conservatively sounding traditional businesses, right? Some of these publishers have been in business for decades, right? Especially the bigger ones. Some of the advertisers have been around for over 10 years as well. So to them, crypto is kind of interesting, but in many ways a gimmick. They don't always trust it. They need to, I mean, they worry about things like volatility, perhaps more so than many of you do in this room, and we have to address their challenges because ultimately if we want to operate, cross-operate with these real-world entities, we have to come up with some sort of a solution. So for example, just to throw out one problem, kind of at you. I mean, how do you do pricing, right? So you want to price something. You want to, I don't know, buy 1,000 ad impressions or something like that. I mean, should pricing here be different from what it is in London to what it is in New York and, a whole bunch of other places? How do you even solve that problem? So in some cases, there are no particularly obvious solutions to challenges like that. So you have to work pretty hard to figure out a way to address these kinds of challenges in a way that appeals to the participants, which are, in our case, end users, publishers, and advertisers. So I think this is all the slides I have. So thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take whatever questions you have.
Thank you for the talk. So you explained how the privacy is going to be preserved with client-side machine learning models. But what happens if if the machine learning model determines that some ad is to be shown to me, and then the content for this ad has to be downloaded? Doesn't that fact that this ad is shown to me reveal some information about me to the publisher?
Yeah, so that would be a side channel. We don't do things that way. So we have a catalog that applies to a specific region. So for example, there might be an ad catalog for the country of France that would be downloaded to your machine and updated, say, daily, and then the matching would be done entirely locally. Doesn't solve the problem of accounting, so that there is a solution to that as well, which we use blinded tokens for. So there's a way to basically count the number of impressions that people have engaged with without revealing who it was that was engaging with these ads. But we cannot download things on demand. We cannot do it for reasons of privacy, but also performance, actually, because then it's going to be a lot more difficult to scale this up. Blinded tokens, so you read about privacy pass and Akamai, we can take this offline. So there is a solution there. So we used Anonyze for a while. So that's large-scale anonymous surveys, so that has some advantages. We are moving to a slightly different system, but it's roughly the same set of principles.
I may have missed this in the beginning, but is there a way of, in effect, users selling their own data on their own browsing habits from within or without Brave?
There is no way to do that, and I think there are disadvantages to allowing people to do that. I can name at least several. I think people will be, there'll be all sorts of tricky behaviors where if this functionality is exposed, then there'll be malicious players who'll try to trick users into doing that, or say blackmail them into doing that. I think there are all sorts of, on top of that, most people don't know how to value that data. And arguably, very few people know how to do it properly, right? So, no, there are reasons we don't necessarily want to expose that as a piece of functionality. So the data remains local. We don't create. We don't provide solutions for you to, send it somewhere else.
If there isn't another one, can I ask a follow-up, which is that, is it collected in the first place?
Is it what?
Is it collected, that information?
Which information?
As in my own, so I type something into the search, or the search bar, or I change my URL. Is that information collected somewhere?
So the data for machine learning models is kept locally on the device, right? So within the browser. We don't, the browser doesn't share it with anybody. And it's enough to build models. And the model quality is oftentimes higher than what you'd get because the browser sees everything. And it can provide a very rich interpretation of that interaction between you and the sites you interact with. So the quality of the information can be really high. Thanks.